And let me build on what Phyllis just said, because I agree with a great deal of her analysis. And in my discussions, I want to focus not so much on the should, but on the how. So not what should we do, what should the policy be, but how do we bring about that policy change? And for that, excuse me, I think we have to be frank. I think we have to be honest that we have very little prospect of changing US nuclear policy this year. I sent around a link to an article I posted a couple of days ago at the Bulletin for Atomic Scientists with the prospects for the nuclear posture review. And that would be minor changes to basically Trump's policy. So we'll probably kill one or two of the smaller programs. Sea Launch Cruise Missile has been mentioned, maybe the low yield warhead on the submarines. They may retire an older 1.2 megaton bomb, the B-83, and there will be some adjustment to declaratory policy, some references to sole purpose, et cetera. But other than that, all the programs going to continue, all the big budget items going to continue. The basic deployment and employment strategies will continue. I think we're going to have prospects for changing that strategy. I think the prospects for changing that strategy will increase in the next 2 or 3 years, but they're still going to be slight. And the reason is basically what you heard Bill Hartung say. This is not a rational argument about what policy should be. It's not a question of risks or persuading one or two members of Congress or one or two members of our family that they should be involved and should in changing this policy. We're up against a huge machine that basically has a hammerlock on US national security strategy. The forces for good are outspent, perhaps about 100 to 1, maybe 1,000 to 1. With the lobbyists, with the political donations. The 5 major defense contractors basically dictate military policy. That's not a radical thing to say. Elizabeth Warren has said it. It's just a fact of the way this thing works. So to counter that, you really need to go at not so much the policy, but the money. That the way to counter that is to shrink the overall size of the military budget and force the Joint Chiefs to make choices. Historically, when the chiefs are forced to choose, they don't choose nuclear. They choose weapons that they actually use, planes, tanks, guns, and troop levels and force posture, rather than giving over to long shot programs like missile defense programs or redundant programs like nuclear weapons. So until we turn this ship around, until we start reducing the overall military budget, we're not going to be able to make significant change in the nuclear posture. So how do you do that? The way I see it is actually just what Phyllis has said. We have to recognize that small nuclear-focused groups are incapable of making that change. It's not that people don't do good work, they do, and they have good analysis and they're fervent advocates, but you can't expect to make this change without having more political and, I would say, financial clout. So that means joining with some of the bigger, broader social movements that already exist, particularly the ones on climate change and social justice. And here's why I say that. In this article I wrote for the Bulletin, I sort of take Joe Biden's side. I understand why he's passing on this opportunity to make changes in nuclear policy, even though he's been a lifelong champion of arms control, even though the nuclear posture that's going to come out is not what Joe Biden actually thinks. He's just making a practical calculation. And you might make the same calculation. He's besieged with multiple crises. He's now, the situation in Ukraine is just a hugely dangerous situation that demands his attention, of course, plus the pandemic and the economic crisis and what he wants to focus on, which is climate change, et cetera. And he's beset by political opponents who are ruthlessly attacking him every day. And he has a razor-thin margin in the Congress, and he can't afford to lose any of those senators or many members of the House. And he would lose them if he cut nuclear programs that are delivering goods to his district. So he's making the choice to pass on this. And he thought he could do both. He thought he could keep a large Pentagon budget and have a big, huge multi-trillion-dollar Build Back Better plan. Well, he's not going to get that plan anymore. He's not going to be able to have both. So he's going to have to choose. And that's where nuclear posture comes in. Not so much that we have a compelling argument about global safety, which we do, but we have a compelling argument about money, about where you can find the money in the federal budget to finance some of the domestic programs that people want. And when we make that link, that is our best shot at shrinking the budget and therefore changing the policy. And we have to recognize finally that the arms control groups are in a period of decline, that they've been waning in influence for some years, and it's going to get worse. Foundation funding is shrinking. The MacArthur Foundation just pulled out of the field. They'll be making their last grants in the next couple of years. And that means that the funding for the field is going to shrink by somewhere about 40%. And that means somewhere around half the groups that are currently working on this in 2 years are going to disappear or be significantly weakened. So the groups that are now struggling for dollars, that are barely hanging on, it's time to merge. It's time to give up the small shop you have or the control that you have in an organization and start to seriously talk about mergers, because the field's going to look very different in 2 or 3 years. And now is the time to be trying to take control of that and merging the 10, 20 groups that work on this into consolidated organizations that can start to have a clout, that can start to bring something to the social movements besides ideas. Let me stop there and take any questions that you might have.